Whoa! What is this?
The Arizona sun was a relentless molten copper coin sinking below the jagged edge of the Surbat Mountains. It bled orange and violet across the vast, empty sky, painting long, distorted shadows across the grounds of the Kingman Flea Market. The air, thick with heat all day, was finally beginning to thin, carrying with it the scent of baked dust, fried onions, and the sweet, cloying aroma of decay that clings to things that have been forgotten for too long. For Julian, this was the best time of day. The frantic energy of the morning crowds had dissipated, leaving behind a quiet, contemplative melancholy. He was an archivist by trade, a custodian of the county's official memories, but his true passion was for the unofficial ones. The stories that slip through the cracks of history, untold and unrecorded. This flea market, a chaotic museum of misplaced lives, was his sanctuary. He walked past tables piled high with the mundane artifacts of yesterday, tarnished silverware that had served family dinners long past, faded postcards with cheerful messages from places that no longer existed, chipped porcelain dolls with unnervingly vacant stares. He was looking for something specific, though he could never articulate what it was until he saw it. It was a feeling, a faint resonance, the quiet hum of a story waiting to be heard. He was about to leave, the day's hunt seemingly fruitless, when he saw the last vendor. The old man was hunched over a folding table at the very edge of the market, where the asphalt frayed into open desert. His wares were sparse, a chaotic collection of rusted tools and weather-beaten furniture salvaged from oblivion. And sitting in the middle of it all, looking profoundly out of place, was the suitcase. It was from another era, a handsome, dark brown leather case, its surface a road map of fine cracks, its corners worn down to a smooth, dark patina by the hands of a traveler he could only imagine. It possessed a quiet dignity, a stark contrast to the junk surrounding it. The brass latches, though tarnished with a greenish hue, were sturdy and well-made. There was no key. It was locked, sealed, a closed book. Julian approached the table, his steps slow and deliberate. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm. The vendor, a man whose face seemed to be carved from desert rock, looked up. His eyes were pale, washed out by decades of relentless sun. "Evening," he grunted, already starting to pack his things into a cardboard box. "The suitcase," Julian said, gesturing towards it. "Does it have a story?" The old man straightened up, wiping a hand across his brow. He squinted at the suitcase as if seeing it for the first time. "That? Just a thing. Found it clearing out a storage locker at the old Starlight Motel on Route 66, right before they tore the whole place down. Been sitting in my garage for years." He kicked it lightly with the toe of his boot. "Probably empty, or full of spiders. You can have it for $10. There was an odd finality in his voice, an eagerness to be rid of it that piqued Julian's interest. The Starlight Motel. He remembered it, a relic of the golden age of the Mother Road. It had stood derelict for 20 years, a skeletal ruin, haunted by the ghosts of 1,000 journeys. "I'll take it," Julian said, pulling a worn $10 bill from his wallet. He didn't haggle. One did not haggle for a secret. The exchange was swift. The weight of the suitcase surprised him. It was heavier than it looked, a solid, dense weight that felt less like old clothes and more like potential. He lifted it from the table, his fingers tracing the worn leather. It felt warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun all day, but Julian felt a different kind of warmth, the familiar thrill of a story about to begin. As he walked towards his car, the last sliver of sun vanished, and the first stars began to prick the deep indigo canvas of the sky. He placed the suitcase carefully on the passenger seat. The moonlight caught the brass lock, making it gleam for a single fleeting moment. He started the engine, the quiet rumble a comforting sound in the vast desert silence. He drove away from the flea market, a low, inexplicable hum seeming to fill the car, a hum that he was sure wasn't coming from the engine. It felt like a whisper, patiently waiting to be understood. Julian placed the suitcase on his large oak desk. In the focused pool of light from his green banker's lamp, the leather seemed even darker, absorbing the light and the silence of the room. For a long moment, he simply looked at it, letting the quiet anticipation build. The journey was over. The exploration was about to begin. His office, usually a place of quiet order and known facts, now felt charged with possibility. His first challenge was the lock. It was a quality brass mechanism, a product of an era when things were built to last. He had a small, specialized set of tools for just such occasions, for opening old diaries and document boxes whose keys had been lost to time. He selected a thin tension wrench and a delicate pick. The process was slow, almost meditative. He wasn't forcing it. He was listening, feeling for the subtle shifts within the lock's internal geometry. He heard the faint click of the first pin setting, then the second. The silence of the room amplified every tiny sound. Finally, after several minutes of intense focus, a solid, satisfying clack echoed from the mechanism. The lock had surrendered its secret. He paused, taking a breath before lifting the lid. A scent escaped from the case. Not the musty odor of decay he expected, but a dry, clean scent, like old paper and faint, unidentifiable spices. The contents were mundane, almost disappointingly so. A gray wool suit, a crisply folded white shirt, a plain black tie, and a pair of polished leather shoes. Everything was of high quality, but utterly anonymous. He ran his fingers over the suit's jacket. Just as the vendor unknowingly hinted at, every single label, from the maker to the dry cleaner, had been meticulously and professionally removed, leaving only tiny, neat puncture marks in the fabric. This was no ordinary traveler. This was a man who had intentionally erased himself. Julian, meticulous in his own way, lifted each item out, placing it carefully on the desk beside the case. He examined the shoes, the shirt, the suit. Nothing. No forgotten letters in the pockets, no stray hairs, no clues. The suitcase was empty. He ran his hand along the interior lining, a faded, patterned fabric. It was then that his practiced fingers detected a subtle inconsistency. Near the back hinge, the fabric felt loose, and the bottom panel seemed to have a slight give to it, a hollowness that shouldn't have been there. His heart began to beat a little faster. A false bottom. It was a classic element of spy novels, but here it was, real and tangible beneath his fingertips. Using a thin palette knife from his restoration kit, he carefully worked at the edge of the liner, gently prying it up. It came away with a soft tearing sound, revealing the clean pine of the panel beneath. There was a small, almost invisible indentation near the edge. He pressed it. Instead of a click, there was only a soft puff of air, and the panel lifted silently by a few millimeters. He lifted the false bottom away, and there, in the secret space, lay the real contents of the suitcase. There were only two items: a leather-bound notebook, its cover smooth and featureless, and beside it, a small, heavy object about the size of his palm, carefully wrapped in a piece of dark, oily cloth. The air in the room suddenly felt very still. The mundane shell was gone, and he was now looking at the core of the mystery. The real story was about to be read. Before allowing himself to touch the notebook, Julian's methodical nature took control. A story without context is just a dream. He needed an anchor, a name, a date. The vendor's words echoed in his mind. Starlight Motel. It was the only thread he had. He pushed the suitcase gently to the side of his desk, the worked object and notebook still nestled inside, and turned to the towering metal cabinets that held the county's past. The archive was silent at this hour, a library of ghosts. He moved through the narrow aisles, the only sound the soft padding of his shoes on the linoleum floor. He knew where to look. The county newspapers, dating back a century, were preserved on reels of microfilm. He pulled the drawer labeled Kingman Daily Miner, 1960 to 1965, selected a reel, and carried it to the microfiche reader in the corner of the room. The machine whirred to life with a low hum, its fan stirring up the scent of dust and electronics. He turned off the overhead light.
Julian finally turned his attention to the notebook. He unwrapped the oilcloth from the heavy object and set the object aside, focusing solely on the book. The leather cover was smooth and dark, without any title or marking. It felt strangely organic in his hands. He opened it to the first page. The script was breathtaking. It flowed across the page with an internal logic and grace that was mesmerizing. It was not like any human writing. Some symbols were sharp and geometric, like miniature circuit diagrams. Others were curved and cellular, as if you were looking at biological life through a microscope. They were arranged in neat, dense paragraphs, but the overall effect was not of text, but of art. For the next week, Julian fell into a deep obsession. He photographed the pages, running the images through every cryptographic software he owned. The results were always the same. No known patterns, no recognized linguistic structure. He spent long nights in the archive's reference section, surrounded by books on ancient languages, military ciphers, and alchemical symbols. He compared the script to Sumerian cuneiform, to Linear A, to the Voynich manuscript. Nothing came close. The process was a slow, grinding failure. The silence of his office was broken only by the rustle of pages and the soft, frustrated sighs he let out into the darkness. He felt like a man trying to understand the ocean by listening to a single seashell. The information was there, he could feel it, but he lacked the senses to perceive it. The script wasn't hostile or chaotic, it was simply beyond. It was a silent language, spoken by a mind that operated on entirely different principles. One night, exhausted, he pushed the books away and simply looked at one of the pages, not trying to decipher it, but just to appreciate it. He let his eyes trace the flow of the symbols, the way they interconnected, the balance and elegance of their design. He realized then that he had been approaching it all wrong. He was trying to break a code, but this wasn't a code designed to be broken. It was a language designed to be learned. And he, with his human mind, was a student with no teacher. Frustrated with the script, he shifted his focus to the diagrams interspersed throughout the notebook. Several pages were dedicated to what were unmistakably star charts. They were drawn with an astronomer's precision, depicting star systems, planetary orbits, and what looked like navigational trajectories drawn in impossibly fine lines. Here, at least, was something he could potentially cross-reference. He powered up his computer, launching a sophisticated planetarium software that contained data from every major sky survey. He began with the most prominent drawing in the book, a star system with two suns, one large and yellow, one small and blue, locked in a graceful dance. A single planet orbited them both, its path a perfect, symmetrical figure 8. He started searching the database for binary star systems with known exoplanets. He found thousands, but none matched the precise configuration in the notebook. He tried to account for stellar drift, for the passage of time. He tried looking at the chart from different angles, imagining it was drawn from a different point in the galaxy. Nothing worked. The chart in the notebook remained stubbornly unique, a map to a place that, according to all known data, did not exist. He moved on to the next chart. This one depicted a lone, massive star surrounded by a dense ring of 7 planets, their orbits so close they seemed to braid around each other. Again he searched. Again, he found nothing. It was beautiful, it was elegant, but it was impossible. The laws of gravity would tear such a system apart. For hours he worked, a growing sense of cosmic vertigo washing over him. The Starlight Motel, the Arizona desert, his small, dusty life, it all felt impossibly small and provincial. He was holding maps, but they were not maps of his universe. They were postcards from another reality, with different rules and different stars in its sky. The man with no name had not just come from another country. He had come from a place so far away, the very stars themselves were strangers. Days bled into a week of dead ends. The script remained silent, the stars remained alien. He felt he was on the verge of shelving the project, of locking the suitcase and hiding it away, admitting defeat. It was late, and he was staring blankly at the wall when his eyes fell on the object that had been wrapped in the oilcloth. He had barely touched it, focusing instead on the book. He picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, dense and solid. The material was like no metal he had ever felt. It was perfectly smooth, without a single seam, and it was cool to the touch. A deep, abiding cool that seemed to draw warmth from his hand. It was featureless, except for one side where a single, elegant symbol was faintly etched into its surface. He froze. His eyes darted from the object to the open notebook on his desk. He scanned the pages, his heart beginning to thrum with a new rhythm. And there it was, the same symbol. It appeared in a chapter filled with diagrams of what looked like energy conduits and power sources. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a word, it was a label, a designation. He held the device in one hand and pointed to the symbol in the book with the other. A connection formed in his mind, a bridge across the silence. He thought of the diagrams, of the flow of energy. A word surfaced in his mind, a concept, power, or source, or core. It wasn't a translation, it was an intuition, a resonance. He felt a faint tingle in the hand holding the device, or perhaps he imagined it. He quickly scanned the book for other simple, isolated symbols that appeared next to functional-looking diagrams. He found one that looked like a stylized speaker or antenna. The concept came to him, broadcast, or signal. Another next to a drawing of interlocking fields, matrix, or field. He let out a long, slow breath. He wasn't cracking a code. He was learning a lexicon of function and concept. The man hadn't left a diary, he had left a user's manual. And Julian, for the first time, was beginning to read it. As Julian began to unlock the conceptual language of the notebook, the world outside his small archive began to feel less stable. The sense of being watched, which he had first dismissed as fanciful, began to sharpen into a quiet, persistent paranoia. It started subtly. He would return to his office after a short break to find a book he had been using placed back on the shelf, but in the wrong spot. A pencil he had left on the desk would be lying on the floor. He told himself it was just his own exhaustion, his mind playing tricks on him. Then came the car. It was a black sedan, a Ford LTD from the 80s, unremarkable in every way except for its persistence. It would be parked across the street from the archive when he arrived in the morning, and it would still be there, silent and vacant, when he left late at night. No one ever got in or out. It was just there, a dark, patient shape in his peripheral vision. The most unsettling development was the static. It started on his office phone line. Whenever he made a call, there was a faint, underlying crackle. But it wasn't random noise. He recorded it one evening, running the audio through a spectrum analyzer. Hidden deep within the hiss, almost at the threshold of human hearing, was a rhythmic, pulsing pattern. It was too faint to decipher, but it was undeniably artificial. It was a signal. It was an echo. One night, working late on the star charts, he felt a sudden chill in the room. He looked up from his desk and glanced out the window. The black car was there, as usual. But for a split second, in the driver's seat, he thought he saw the flare of a match or the glow of a cigarette. He blinked, and it was gone. The car was empty, as always, but Julian knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he was no longer alone in this mystery. The book had a reader, and now the reader had an audience. With his new vocabulary of concepts, power, field, signal, matrix, warp, Julian returned to the most complex diagrams in the notebook. What he had first taken for simple blueprints now revealed themselves to be something far more profound. He realized the drawings were not for a machine of gears and wires. They were schematics for a device that manipulated the fundamental fabric of reality itself. It was a machine of pure thought, made manifest. One diagram, which he now understood to be the primary function of the device, showed how to generate a localized causality field. It didn't move an object from one place to another. It seemed to create a bubble around the user where the destination and the origin point became adjacent, momentarily the same place. It wasn't travel, it was a redefinition of location. The trajectories on the star maps weren't paths through space. They were the calculated points where space itself was to be folded. Another schematic detailed how to create a resonant frequency that could temporarily make solid matter permeable, not by breaking it apart, but by convincing its atoms that they were no longer bound together. It was physics as poetry, technology as philosophy. He sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. He was holding the instruction manual for a tool that operated on principles humanity hadn't even begun to imagine. The man from the Starlight Motel wasn't just a traveler, he was an engineer, a physicist, a magician. The small, cool object on his desk wasn't a key or a weapon, it was a chisel, and the entire universe was its block of stone. And for some reason, this cosmic craftsman had died in a cheap motel on Route 66, leaving his tools behind. The question was no longer just who he was, but what unimaginable force could possibly have stopped him. He had reached a plateau. He understood the how of the device, but the who and why of its owner remained a total mystery. Believing he had exhausted every clue, he began the process of documenting the original contents of the suitcase for his own private archive. He picked up the gray wool suit for a final inspection. He ran his hands along the seams, the pockets, the collar, feeling for anything he might have missed. His fingers stopped on the hem of the jacket. There was a tiny lump, hard and flat, sewn deep inside the fold of the fabric. It was an expert job. He had missed it completely on his first pass. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, he used a seam ripper to cut the stitches. He reached inside with 2 fingers and pulled out a small, stiff piece of paper. It was a ticket, faded, yellowed, and impossibly fragile. It looked like a claim ticket from a dry cleaner. Most of the ink had vanished over the decades, but under the bright light of his desk lamp, a few words were still legible. The name of the business was gone, but the location was printed at the bottom. Glenelg, South Australia. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He knew the name. Every student of Unsolved Mysteries knew the name. Glenelg Beach, South Australia. The location where, in 1948, the unidentified man known to history as the Somerton Man was found dead. He scrambled to his computer, his hands trembling slightly. He pulled up the familiar case file, the Somerton Man, found on a beach with all his clothing labels removed, possessing a wallet with no ID and a secret pocket containing a scrap of paper with the words "Tamam Shud," meaning "it is finished." The case's central mystery was a book containing a nearly unbreakable code. The parallels were too perfect, too numerous to be a coincidence.
The cut labels, the code, the lack of identity, the quiet, inexplicable death. His John Doe from 1963 wasn't a singular event. He was a piece of a much larger, older puzzle. A puzzle that spanned decades and continents. This wasn't the story of one stranded traveler. It was the story of a silent, scattered network. A diaspora of phantoms hiding in the plain sight of human history, leaving behind only impossible questions when they fell. Julian leaned back in his chair, the hum of his computer the only sound in the vast silence of the archive. The mystery was not solved. It had only become infinitely larger. His small-town mystery had merged with a global enigma, a thread in a tapestry he could never hope to see in its entirety. He slowly and deliberately put everything away. The notebook, with its silent language, was placed back in the hidden compartment. The cool, heavy device was wrapped once more in its oilcloth and laid beside the book. The tiny ticket from Glenelg Beach, a ghost from another hemisphere, was placed on top. He closed the false bottom, the sound a soft puff of air. He closed the main lid of the suitcase, and the click of the brass latch echoed in the room, a sound of finality. The mystery was sealed once more, but it was different now. The secret was no longer inside the suitcase. It was inside him. He walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping town. The black car was gone. He didn't know if it would be back, but it no longer mattered. Fear had been replaced with a profound sense of responsibility. He was not an investigator anymore. He was a custodian, an archivist in the truest sense of the word. He had been entrusted with a story far more important than any official county record. He knew he could never share it. Who would believe him? He would be called a madman, and the book and the device would be taken, ending up in a government vault, another secret buried under layers of bureaucracy. No. The man from the Starlight Motel had left his legacy in the hands of a stranger for a reason. He had trusted it to the quiet chaos of a flea market, to be found by someone who would understand not the answers, but the importance of the questions. Julian turned off his desk lamp, letting the soft moonlight fill the room. He would keep the secret. He would protect the story. And on quiet nights, he would sit in the darkness and wonder about the man with no name and the impossible, starlit place he had called home. The story was not over. It was simply waiting, a quiet question mark, drifting in the silent expanse of the night.